Harvey is a former candidate for our state House of Representatives in Milton, and he can say a little bit more about that experience, his background, and how it fed into what we're doing.
So before I go into my spiel, I put some goodies over there so people can get out there now as well. But they are pocket parables, it's part of what we do, and a synopsis of what Transcendental Politics is about in our patented packets. And there's laminated versions of it, so you can take a quick glance when you pick them. Partly because of sleep deprivation and partly to keep me on track, I sort of wrote something from the semi-read them. My current in-between floors elevator speech is that Transcendental Politics is a cross between a societal group therapy session and a civic academy. Like many ideas, it's a very simple idea at the center, almost trite. It's so simple, but when you explore it and develop it, it becomes very complex and powerful. So the idea at the center of Transcendental Politics is the questions of how could we as compassionate and rational people help create a kinder and wiser world together. Now, obviously, that's a question people have been asking all through human history, and it's generated a whole bunch of social institutions as a result. World religions and philosophical movements, including the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment, and political parties and civil rights movements, nonprofits, all sorts of stuff has been generated by the desire to create a wiser and kinder world. We have that whole panoply of world religions and everything else, and we have from that corpus of experimentation a lot of lessons about both how to do it right and how to do it wrong. What works and what doesn't work, what the pitfalls are, how it backfires, what the obstacles are that we face to do it well. So for me, well, Transcendental Politics is just another experimentation, another iteration in that ongoing evolution, in that ongoing process. So for me, there are a bunch of different streams, both personal and historical, that went into the creation of Transcendental Politics. For me, one moment of conception is when I ran for the Colorado House of Representatives in what would be considered a safe Republican district as a Democrat. I was sort of sacrificial lamb. Hey, who wants to run? And they were asking. I said, yeah, sure, that's me. And so I knew it gave me a lot of freedom. It was really not one of these ones that you could have a bold victory. It was one of these ones where at that time, no way. But I asked myself, how would I couch my message that I truly believe in a way that might resonate with people of a completely different ideological orientation? And the phrase I came up with was reasonable people of goodwill working together. Because one would hope most people want to at least think that they are reasonable people of goodwill. In modern Western civilization, you have to claim that you have the reasonable position. And most people want to not only claim it outwardly, they want to believe it inwardly. And that could be our common ground, not the fact that we are reasonable people. Very, very few of us are, included in this room. We're not inherently rational. Humans are not inherently rational. But the desire to be, if we can create a facilitating framework for that desire, is our common ground. So, as a result of this, I lost the election, but I kept playing with this idea. And I thought, this could be a kind of cool thing. So what would I do to make a movement, which, and I'm an intellectual, just a very intellectual life. And I like rational debate and rational discussion and look at the evidence. Let the best argument prevail. If someone makes a better argument than you can make, if you can't beat it, you have to say, okay, you know what, I've got to think about that at least, because you've got a good argument, right? How do you facilitate that? How do you make it happen? And the original name of the movement was Politics of Reason and Goodwill, PRG. That was my first thought. I said, I need something a little bit here. What are we really trying to do? We're trying to transcend our false certainties, our ideological tribalism. Let's call it transcendental politics. And at first, I was going to say this later, but at first I was a little worried about that. about transcendental politics, it sounds so esoteric and Eastern and Hare-Krishna. I don't know. I think it's very pragmatic. It's nuts and bolts. It's just, how do we do this right? You know, and I'm really kind of thinking, how do we do it rationally? I'm not looking at a mystical solution. I'm looking at privileging reason. But later on, that name turned out to be a little more prescient than I realized. So, one of the keys to creating this discipline, this paradigm, is admitting that we don't know. I think the cornerstone of transcendental politics is what I call wise uncertainty, or what we can call intellectual humility. One of the big problems, and even as partisans we make this mistake, and on both sides, to varying degrees and in varying ways, I'm not trying to create a false equivalency, but it's a very common human mistake, that we know what we know and we know that it's right. And we don't have a lot of checks and balances inside of ourselves to make sure that we're not kidding ourselves the way those people over there are kidding themselves, right? We always know that those people over there are fooling themselves. We aren't as quick to see that we are, often, in many ways. So that awareness, that inward-looking part, as well as the outward-looking part, political activism tends to be very outward-focused. We have a position that we feel passionately about. We are going to fight for it. There are others over there who are just wrong, and we're going to beat them, right? That is political activism, and sometimes that's valuable, and sometimes that's necessary. And this is not mutually exclusive of that. The good fight exists. The civil rights movement was necessary. Fighting to address climate change is necessary. Fighting to defeat Trump and Trumpism is necessary. There are good fights that we have to engage in. It's one of the things we have to do, but we also have to play the long game. And the long game is looking at how we feed into that. We contribute to that. I'll tell you personally, I think that we folks on the left are far more responsible for Trump getting elected than we take credit for. We are, and I mean, our smug liberal superiority made the right want to give us a big middle finger in the form of Trump. We didn't do what was most effective and beneficial. We did what felt good. We did what satisfied ourselves emotionally. And you know what? They're doing what satisfies themselves emotionally. We're not that much better if the results are that bad. So transcendental politics is, how do you act in a way that is beneficial and effective? Not what gratifies you. How do you look inward and admit that you're fallible? And how do you make that a model, an attractive model, that others might want to emulate and that can spread and that can become a social movement, sort of like world religions of the past, sort of like civil rights movements, but something that is a perpetual, let's admit that we're all fallible. Let's admit that none of us have all the answers. And let's create a movement that generates kindness and wisdom through that self-awareness. So I missed a lot of stuff because I didn't actually read what I wrote. But that's okay. You'll get it all in time. Because you're going to get on our website, you're going to join our group, you're going to read that stuff over there that I wrote. And you're going to be like, so we have a 501c3 that we formed with a bunch of brilliant people. And Eric. Eric is our grant writer. But he's our grant writer, and we got him on the line. We have a PhD in political science who wrote his dissertation on John Rawls' theory of justice, which happened to be one of the cornerstones when I was developing this. So before I give it over to Eric, I'm just going to say that there is both an intellectual side to this and a pragmatic side. I'm currently writing 2 books, one handbook on an aspect of the pragmatic side, which is how do you engage in public discourse, particularly on social media, in a more effective and beneficial way. And it draws on things like William Ury and Roger Fisher, who wrote Getting to Yes decades ago, and then William Ury's later work on bargaining, then a bunch of cognitive science and stuff about what really is persuasive and what really does resonate with people, and how do you really do this right. And the idea that you just don't go in gangbusters. And this is great because my personality is totally the opposite. So this has forced me to be introspective, to be aware of my faults and my fallibilities, and my defects, to address them, to work on them. And that's what we all need to do. And Eric, really makes me pumped up. He doesn't let me get away with stuff. So the reason why transcendental became fortuitous is because to transcend our political, our ideological tribalism, transcend our false certainties, to transcend these things that we identify so strongly with and that becomes a part of who and what we think we are, you really do have to work at transcending your ego somewhat. And transcending your ego somewhat is what that original Eastern Transcendentalism was all about. So it turns out that the name predicted a fundamental truth. We have to let go of our egos to some extent to transcend these false certainties and these ideological tribal allegiances. And with that, I turn it back over to you.
So before I say anything much more, I'm interested in what sorts of thoughts our group has about what you've heard and seen. Any just kind of spontaneous thoughts about it? It sounds good. Some reservations.
A question that was running through my mind. Have you been able to find any rational Republicans who agree?
My target in that group are moderate libertarians. So I think, I'm not personally libertarian. It doesn't. I'll tell you one thing about libertarianism that resonates with me. It is a very, very complex world we live in. The processing of information is much bigger than our individual processing of information. And so a certain amount of decentralization and laissez-faire allows the genius of the many to flow. So there is some truth in that, okay? But other than that, yeah, we need government involvement. You can't just let markets run amok. You really, a modern capitalist economy requires a lot of management to function. There's just no doubt about that. But moderate libertarians are kind of very often they're willing to be in the rational dialogue. They're interested in they'll say, yes, we should be rational. Yes, we should do what's good for humanity. What's good for humanity is freedom, right? Unfortunately, freedom, when you get a little past moderate, freedom tends to mean my freedom to screw everyone else. But, I think there's an inroad there. Now, I think we have to be careful about characterizing everyone. So there is, even among Trump supporters, even among, let's say, right-wing evangelicals, groups that would be less amenable in general, there are going to be people who you can reach. There are going to be people who have some aspect of how they think, where they're coming from. Maybe not the majority, but you're going to find people there. And I have been surprised in my life at people who have just sort of, obviously not the majority, but every once in a while they say, wow, I didn't really think of that. I didn't really see it that way. That does happen. And part of what Transcendental Politics is about is developing the art and science of making that happen more often.
I would just think that transcendental politics would be really important when as Democrats, we know that we're living with, most of everyone here is Republican, and we need the independent vote to win,
Right.
to just go forward. And we could use this tool could be excellent to reach across to the independent voters. Because they're in the middle, they're hearing both sides, and they can be swayed either way. So why not use this as a tool to reach across and try and be rational?
And I said, look, we're not coming at this as Democrats. We're not coming at this as liberals. We're coming at this as human beings, just trying to figure out how to do it. I think, again, I can honestly say, I think there are some popular positions on the left that maybe a strong analysis, more empirical research doesn't actually support. I say, wait, I don't want to go there. But I think there are a couple of positions that when you pull together all the empirical information, you do the strongest analysis. A lot of popular positions, it's questionable. So go in there and say, look, we might be wrong about some things. You might be wrong about some things. We might be right about some things. You might be right about it. Let's figure it out together. Let's make our common ground not you have to be in our tribe or we have to be in your tribe. let's just leave those tribes behind and work together to make
Because if we're
something.
not gonna talk to one another, we never move forward.
Yeah.
And that's what's happening, we're really splitting apart.
Does party get in the way?
Absolutely. Eric, you want to take it?
Well, so, let me ask you a question, actually, well, I think you wanted to say something or something.
Steve, I may have misunderstood you. You'll help me a bit.
Sure.
If I transcend my ideological positions, my religious positions, my political positions, who am
Yeah. No, so here's actually the way, I didn't want to go into too much detail, but we don't visualize or vision absolute transcendence for a variety of reasons. One, tribalism is valuable. What are we trying to do? Look at these tribalists with their t-shirts, joining a tribe. So tribalism has its value, joining a group and a movement has value. We're trying to do that. So it's not all bad. Transcending our tribalism is similar to transcending our self-interest. We don't give up our self-interest. We engage in enlightened self-interest. We say, okay, for me to get what I want as an individual, I have to recognize that the people I'm interacting with have wants and needs and desires as well. And if I help them achieve theirs in a way that allows them to help me achieve mine, you got a win-win, non-zero-sum thinking. So enlightened tribalism is, we don't give up being Democrats. We don't give up being liberals. We don't give up being Catholics or Buddhists or Jews, whatever. I would say, I've always said, when people say religion is the root of all evil, I say, no, dogma is the root of all evil. Religion can be beautiful and valuable and wonderful. It's dogma that becomes the problem. And we can use these cultural materials to, I think an individual is based on the cultural material. I'm a big lover of cultural material, the literature and mythology and the stories and the shared rituals that we engage in. Even in my own family with my daughter, we have elaborate rituals that's part of our culture and makes us who we are. So no, we don't give that up. What we give up is the false certainty. What we do is we help evolve that culture, that cultural material, away from I know all because my ideology tells me all. And we move on to, I have a beautiful narrative that I'm proud of. I'm enriched by a huge history and multitude of people engaging in the evolution of that narrative, a beautiful, complex story with stories inside of stories inside of stories. And I love it. But it enriches me to keep knowing, to keep reaching towards subtler and deeper and more expansive understandings. So you don't give up that who you are. Your religion can be your voice, your language. What we try to do is we try to reduce, and maybe ideally to some extent eliminate, the false certainty, the dogmatic belief that my truth is the one truth and all other truths are therefore wrong. And the more enlightened belief that I have an understanding. My current understanding is what I rely on, but my understanding is fallible. So I want to draw on understandings of all others to the greatest extent possible to see how I can improve mine as a result.
And I'd like to add something and have you speak.
Right.
I was just thinking what Buzz said is that we're trying not to lead with party or religion, and I picture it as being like a snowplow in the front of a big truck. And if we could instead just reach people to people and the common good, everyone working for the common good, and hold back what your religious, cultural, political things are until you meet the human that you're interacting with.
I think that's very valuable. Another slant I'd like to add to this is, as part of transcending, get into the mindset of, I do not believe this because I am this, the other way around. I am this because I believe this, right? So being a Democrat doesn't, like Procrusty in bed, impose upon a person a set of beliefs. A person has a set of beliefs that would incline a person to affiliate with people who have similar beliefs. And what's important about transcendental politics is the recognition that as we gather more information, as we learn more, as we keep our minds open to other perspectives, our beliefs can change. We have to always be willing to accept the possibility of change, changing our minds based on new circumstances or new understandings. So I think that's an important part of transcending in term. And getting to the thought about how we interact with other people and what are other target audiences, let me ask, has anyone here in the last fortnight been in a flame war on social media? A flame war. I mean, like, gotten to an angry argument. Stupid.
You know.
A minor. If you think right, tell me about what that was like. It was.
Well, that's personal.
Yeah, this is going out over the tube.
Well, it really wasn't. It wasn't horrible, but it was really unexpected, let's say. I have cousins that are very right-wing. They threaten, they talk about civil war on social media. I stopped following them long ago because I didn't want to see it. So, and it's a big family. This isn't just a few people. And I got to finally see somebody that I've admired for several years, Beto O'Rourke, just a few weeks ago. And I put a photo of him on my Facebook. And on my Facebook, I'm very active in politics, but I only put positive stuff. The events that we go to, and when we're canvassing and taking pictures of ourselves, a lot of you have been there, and just positive stuff about working within our political system. That's what it is. And but I put the picture of Beto, and he happens to be from the state where my cousin lives. And for the first time ever, that cousin remarked on a posting of mine, and it was that picture of Beto O'Rourke. And he said, he's no longer a Texan. Which, of course, it flames out of my ears. Because not only, I mean, I could put all the cute dog pictures and the family pictures for years now and never heard from him. I didn't know he ever paid any attention to anything. And immediately that so I actually went back to him and I said, Beto, I'm sure, would disagree with you. He's an American, he's a Texan, and I don't want your negativity on my Facebook, so don't follow me. I actually asked him not to follow me. If he wants to put negativity, he can do it on his own, but not on mine.
By the way, that's called the no true Texan logical.
Did you hear back from him?
No, she cut it off.
He'll be here Saturday.
Staying
with you, right?
Your cousin. Oh my gosh.
He's bringing, well, his mother is my mother's sister, and they're 80 some and 90 some years old, so I can't be the bad guy in this, so he'll be here, and I have to be a lady.
You have to
So,
transcend.
Yeah. And you're all invited for lunch. All
If you wear blue.
yeah. So that was it.
Yeah.
It was very personal, and
Yeah.
because it's family, and it's
Sure.
not something that I can walk away from.
Yeah.
It wasn't a stretcher.
Well, so speaking from my own experience and speaking from Steve's experience, I think it's a pretty common phenomenon of wanting to win the argument, right? And put the other person in his place, put the other person in her place. And we get trigger other people. And I think part of transcendental politics is adopting, again, a mindset, a philosophy that if we're really going to be effective in this world, we really ought to think about how we communicate with other people to draw them to us and not try to push them away, and people are irritated, right? And so part of transcendence is I think transcending our own self-triggering about how annoying other people can be, right?
And this gets really complicated because sometimes we're using another person who we really don't believe we can reach as a foil to communicate to invisible third parties who might be looking at. So on social media, when I get into an intense interaction, I'm not communicating with that person. I'm communicating with others because I know that person's not going to listen, right? But even then, you have to be attractive if you want to attract. So however you do it, kindness, an open heart, a willingness to show love to people who may not seem to deserve it, is going to attract more people than just being a bitter asshole, So definitely, even if you're using them as a foil, the modality you adopt is going to have to be an attractive one.
Absolutely. Yes. Oh, so I just wanted to kind of piggyback on that. So we want to see there's one slide. So last March, I don't know if you're familiar with Arthur Brooks. Arthur Brooks is the former president of the American Enterprise Institute. He's now in the faculty of the Kennedy School at Harvard and Harvard Business School. And so he was the head of a right-wing think tank, American Enterprise Institute. And he's written some books, and he's really kind of dedicated his public life now to a lot of what transcendental politics is about. And I had in mind, I put this as an early slide here, and what Steve just said really touched upon. So he said, you should see the contempt around us as what it truly is, an opportunity, not a threat. If you're on social media, on a college campus, or in any place other than a cave by yourself, you'll be treated with contempt very soon. This is a chance to change at least one heart, yours. Respond with warm-heartedness and good humor. You are guaranteed to be happier. If that also affects the contemptuous person or bystanders, it will be to the good. It is easy to feel helpless in the current political environment, but I believe that is unwarranted. While we might not like the current weather, together we can change the climate to reward leaders and be the leaders who uplift and unite, not denigrate and divide. Watch, the weather will start to improve, and that will make America greater. So I found that to be a very uplifting quote, and really part and parcel of what we're all about. Now, maybe that's what
we actually see, one of the things since we've started doing this is the amount of communication from different directions and different people that really resonates with transcendental politics. And that is transcendental politics by another name. There are tons of scholars and tons of speakers who are talking about this. There is, I think, and I thought this some time ago before Trump and during the Tea Party heyday, I thought, you know what? I think we are coming to a certain kind of culmination where the time is right for this. And I think a lot of people, politically engaged and otherwise, are sick of the toxicity. Right?
Yeah.
So let's say, okay, we've got an alternative to toxicity. There's an alternative. I don't know if you want to go to the loose.
well, all right. So and you can.
So I gave this a cute name, the Fleur de Luz, kind of a takeoff on the French Fleur de Lis. And Fleur de Luz is Spanish for flower of life. And the idea here is that we're taking 5 basic values. And the 3 that I really think are most important are humility, imagination, and kindness. Now remember, I came into this emphasizing reason. Reason was the thing I thought. But really, like Einstein said, imagination is more important than knowledge. And I think when you combine imagination with humility, you get reason. Imagination is our consciousness in full bloom. Humility motivates discipline. And disciplining your imagination is basically rational thought, logical analysis. So kindness, imagination, and humility combined. Imagination and kindness is empathy. And then you go in, and in the middle is the symbol of transcendental politics. And all of that converges on transcendental politics. The idea of just combining these. Now, one of the things I emphasize, because I'm such a flawed person, is that be kind to yourself as well as to others. Forgive yourself as well as others. And it's not like you have to suddenly be this perfected Buddha to be a part of Transcendental Politics. Just say, you know what, that's a good idea. That's something worth striving for. I'll mess up sometimes. I might even enjoy messing up sometimes. But I'm going to keep working toward that because that's the way to work toward a better world. If I really care about humanity, if I really care about creating a better world for my child and everyone's children, then I'm going to try to do more of this because this is what works in the long run.
I think that actually describes Greta. If you put that little kid in there. She's
Greta's
I mean,
fantastic.
she works.
Greta's fantastic.
Just hit every single thing.
Yeah.
She's pretty humble and she's
Yeah.
determined and she's tranquil and
Did you see her face when the little boy went to protect her from the media?
Oh,
Did anyone
yeah.
see that video? Because she has a nice dour Scandinavian expression most of the time. But this little boy came there, the people were taking pictures, the journalists, and for some reason he felt protected. He jumped in there to protect her and she started smiling like, oh, that's cute.
she's very.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that this totally aligns with CCL and MO as well. And I wanted to give a quick example on how you can change kind of communication, like Robin, you were saying, talk to people around you about climate change. An example of how you might go into that conversation different is if you go in like, oh my God, world's on fire, we're all gonna die, right? But if you go in and climate change is brought up in the conversation and you say something like, I understand that, you have some doubt, but what if we look at it from like a risk mitigation perspective? What if there's just 50% chance or 20% chance that this can happen? Like, do you think we should take some action for risk mitigation? Like to use like different words when speaking to conservatives that don't have the same, viewpoint as you. You don't want them to just look at you and be like, oh, you're a tree hugger, like stop talking.
And part of it, I think, with Transcendental Politics, okay, so I wanted to get to rational discourse. But one of the things, and I know the cognitive science that we're not inherently rational people, and even when we try to be rational people, we're not going to do that great. Scientists who are trained to be rational analysts, when they're not working in their specialty, when they're talking about politics, they do the same thing the rest of us do. It's a social process that sort of cultivates our cognitive landscape. And it's a social process, a social construction of reality. So one of the things I was drawn to was that creating the context in which that can happen, the facilitating context, is really where the game is. So create a context where you could say something reasonable, and it can be heard in a reasonable way. So that's a big part of the challenge.
So I do hypnotherapy, and a lot of what you guys are talking about is kind of getting into that. And so I don't know if you know much about that or neurolinguistic programming, but I'm just wondering how many people in your group or how many that you're working with are actually willing to really do become aware of that ego part, and how many people kind of listening to this talk would be willing to actually work on the ego and really question what it is, because the language that we use to argue, like for instance, Eric has the language we use shortcuts our experience, and it's just that's the way it has to be. So we're talking to each other with each our own individual shortcuts of our experiences. And so when we have a conversation that is politically charged, we're driving each other crazy, and we're actually feeling stuff that other people may not be talking to.
And similar to the gradual reduction in tensions in negotiations and bargaining, I don't think we can expect many people to say, yes, I am so ready to question my ego.
Yeah.
It's, you get the first kernel of a thought of maybe there's something there, and you start developing that slowly. And it's this is the long game. I think there are some immediate benefits in this era. I think there definitely are. I think we could have a bigger effect on transforming our current political landscape with this than we can with the alternative modality. But this is really the long game more than anything else. This is investing in something that we want to see grow. Where people say, you know what? yeah, that would be the ideal. And then we're trying to create a facilitating framework for it. So, for instance, has anyone seen the Heineken commercial Worlds Apart? So it's a beautiful Heineken commercial which expresses one dimension of what we're into. And they had people from utterly diametrically opposed positions on pairs of people on diametrically opposed positions on highly sensitive issues. And they purposely put them together without knowing anything about them. There were instructions waiting for them in the room all by themselves with a bunch of boxes and junk. And they started working on it together. This was what they agreed to. And they built a bar. And it was a pretty arduous endeavor that they were working on together, having to think it out and plan it out and cooperate. And they were talking and enjoying each other. And then they built the bar, and then they see a video of each other's initial interview, where they stated their position on that controversial issue. And then the announcer says, you have a choice. You can each go your own way, or you can sit down and have a beer together. And all the people they showed sat down and had a beer together and talked it out. And some exchanged numbers, and then really you could see some transformation right there and then. People who were extremely prejudiced about something. So, were greatly reduced in their prejudice from that interaction. And that definitely is a major factor in reducing prejudices, an intimate interaction with a member of the group that you have that prejudice.
And is your group able to start working on those type of activities? Because those are kind of like getting people together.
As soon as you guys become a nature funders.
Yeah.
We do, resources we're not there yet in terms of resources.
So, but there is an addition that does involve face-to-face interactions, debates, where there are ground rules and where,
Well, my ideal for the debates is to have debates in which people argue the opposite of their sincerely held view. There are a lot of advantages to that. One, you have to research a position that challenges your assumptions. Two is it helps to tamp down the emotion a little bit, even though you do get emotional about the position you're arguing, even when it's the opposite of your sincerely held view. It helps to quell that just a little. And it's an interesting way to combine a bunch of benefits. That rational, I believe in the competition of arguments. Let the best arguments prevail. I'm a nominal lawyer. I was an academic. I'm an arguer. So
kind of like the structure of the debate.
Yeah. And I like the idea. Get your evidence, and and there are tricks. I mean, don't get me wrong. There are people who know how to pull some tricks, and you have to identify them and know how to call those tricks out. Some of them are very clever. There's what I call information-intensive petticoating. So people who feel very strongly, have a very strong dogmatic view, they sometimes will learn an enormous amount about the issue. And then they'll bombard a challenger with esoteric details that the challenger can't possibly hope to respond to. And then they sort of win by default in their view. And it's like you have to be able to call that out. Look, I know that Shapiro. Yeah, there are. I mean, that's a technique. And so all of these techniques, part of the ideal of really robust rational discourse is that you have more and more people who can call it out by name. Oh yeah, that's information-intensive pettifogging. We all know what that is, so let's do a little better.
Yes.
One thing I notice a lot, I've canvassed for many years, right? And most campaigns, when you run a campaign, there's the persuasion period, right? For canvassing before you do the get out the vote period. And in Douglas County, right, a lot of the persuasion period is where you knock on unaffiliated doors, right? And if the person is willing to answer the door, which is about maybe 20% of the time, maybe less, right? There's an art to the conversation, right? Meaning, you get a script, and that script is very, hey, this is where we stand and all that. But what I find, and when I canvass, it's effective, right, is I usually thank the person for answering the door and willing to speak with me. But I typically ask them, what's important to you, right? So you find out from the person that was willing to open their door to you what is important to them, right? And you take the time to listen, right? And show respect, right? And then you try to create a conversation from that, right? That maybe, just maybe, where you can get your point in about whatever you're canvassing for, right? And I find over the years that is, for me, best way to connect.
In William Urey's work, and Fisher and Urey before that, so I scoured a few of his books. The listen is probably the biggest repeated piece of advice throughout in bargaining therapy. It's the best investment you could ever make. Just listen. Listen a lot. Listen more. Just keep listening, because people that creates an opening. That creates the opportunity to draw people. People will listen to you. They won't listen if you're not listening to them.
Right, and I would add, wherever possible, to validate the other person, when you be aware that other person has a legitimate point, which you may disagree with, but can see as a valid point. I think it's very helpful to validate that person holding that point.
And acknowledge that it's their point, whether you agree with it or not. Say, I hear what you're saying. Okay, so what you're saying is that you think that we really need to be more aware of how America is focusing too much on the welfare of other people who aren't Americans, and we really should be focusing on our own welfare more. And I hear what you're saying. I really can understand that. So you're not saying I agree that that's the right ideological perspective, but you're saying, I hear what you're saying. I understand what you're saying. You're acknowledging that. You're acknowledging them as a person. You're acknowledging that their perspective is their perspective.
Yes, Kim.
We have Canvas before together, and I think it's wonderful to ask people what they care about, if you get that far. What I found to get that far, to open the door, is actually just to see them. Now, I'm a visual person, and I don't know exactly what you think you are. But we all have perceptions about ourselves, and I'd like to say, oh, well, this is an amazing yard. Your flowers are just unbelievable. I can't believe you've grown corn in the middle of all those flowers. That's really cool. And then what that does is, first of all, it's natural for me because I'm ADD.
You're the house of a nice person who notices things.
But I think it's really important to be seen. And when you recognize that you actually see the person, and then you can get to where.
That's because you're a visual person. But if you're an auditory person or a kinesthetic person.
I know, it's a riot, isn't it?
So there's different.
Which is why I listen to work so well, because if you listen to the adjectives, you're going to find out whether they tend to be more visual or
Yes.
Right.
kinesthetic. And that's pretty easy to if you're listening.
But just to Carol's point, when we canvass together, right? The fact that I brought a candidate to the door, right, really made people say, wow, I had a candidate that came with me to the door. Just for that reason alone, I'm going to vote for you, right?
And just as a joke here, it's a true joke. I was the driver, so I'm driving. These two go to the door, and I'm sitting there, and I look around, and they disappeared. Not only did they knock the door and meet the person, they were invited inside. And I'm like, are you serious? And she was painting, remember?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and then she wanted to know their opinions about, is this color right on the wall? What do you think of this decoration? And then they're coming, TikTok, hello, we need to talk here. And I'm like, seriously? So effective, both of them together, they make a good team.
Yeah, and that's kind of the distinction between the sort of deep work, the deep long-term investment, and you got a campaign, man. You got 2 minutes per house. You don't get to sit in there hanging out, chat. Yeah.
So what you're talking about, if it's applied to politics, say on a national level, it would be bipartisanship, true bipartisanship, where they listen to one another, debate the facts, and perhaps change their.
Well, yeah, but here's one my sociological background kind of kicks in here somewhat, and I try not to think in terms of wishes. I try to think in terms of what actions can I take and encourage others to take. So whether our elected officials are going to suddenly become bipartisan because of transcendental politics, no. You know, maybe decades, generations in the future, this could ripple through the fabric of our culture or something like it. I mean, whether it's this or something else, I think this kind of thing is going to be happening. And that could affect what goes on in the halls of power. We actually, even though it has the word politics in it, transcendental politics has nothing to do with elections, the halls of government, trying to influence that directly. We're trying to influence the culture in which politics takes place and the cognitive landscapes of individuals and groups of people, so that over time, the positions people take are gradually more rational, more compassionate, more imaginative. And in that way, the people they vote for, the things they fight for, and the policies they lobby for are effective in the long term.
I would say it is starting to happen. We probably don't put your guys' vocabulary to it, but it is something we're starting to see happen more and more as people looking for something that gets past the divisiveness of the two parties. And I think you see it especially among younger generations who, when you ask them about specific parties, they disengage, but when you ask them about specific policies and issues, they actually come together and have a conversation. So it's starting to happen. I think it's awesome that you guys are working on these tools and this vocabulary. And I'm excited to see like what ideas you guys have.
The books are going to be really cool. I've been saying for a year the handbook is going to come out, but I think other things get in the way. I mean, I have one section for parts.
Me and some friends wrote a book, and we were 2 months away from being publishing for like 7 months long.
Yeah. But then there's the treatise that I put on the back. The treatise is where my heart is. The handbook, I feel like I'm a monster, because that's a set of skills that I'm learning about and processing, but that I'm not really a master of. Yeah.
But like events where you bring like a debate stage and have people have these discussions that are like 20 minutes long, and there's like tools we could use to then like poll the audience about like who's doing well and for what reason, like breakout sessions. Like eventually I think having stuff like that in our society and our government frameworks will allow us to do this. It's just like a balancing act of, the long versus short term. There are like races and things we need to work on now while building a system that allows for that.
But I think the reaction to tribalism is there. The tribalism is still there on both sides. There is a lot of tribalism on both sides. The tribalism is still very much there and very much an obstacle. But the reaction to it is also there, and I think we're on.
Right. And getting back to something that Steve alluded to earlier when he gestured at, because all and I are wearing the same shirts, and the tribe of transcendental politics, it's the idea that there can be different flavors of the transcendental politics tribe. It could be the Republican flavor, the Democrat flavor, the Green flavor, the Libertarian flavor of people's intellectual beliefs and of maybe some social beliefs, all as subsets of the idea that we bring those beliefs within a framework of being rational and compassionate and thinking about things in honest ways and arguing in good faith and listening. So there's a supra tribe that we can, we can take some pride in being part of this enlightened transcendental tribe.
Even if you disagree completely on certain issues.
Right. Without, it's not a matter of replacing being a Democrat, replacing being something else.
It's an overlay or an underlay. One of the things we do on our group page, on our Facebook group page, and I insisted on this role, and it's hard for everybody, it's hard for people to get used to it. But on that group page, not that this is something that is enforced on all of our pages, no mention of anything that reveals any partisan membership or inclination. We don't mention office holders, parties, policies on that page. We talk about how do we cultivate this, and that's all we talk about. We do share articles that deal with the cognitive science, the sociology of it, the bargaining aspects of it, the bargaining theory, the social, social networking theories, social bonding theories. We deal with that stuff, but we're saying on this page, we don't want any indications of a particular tribe dominating this movement. We want anyone who looks at this page not to know. Or if they know implicitly, then shame on them, because whoever is attracted to trying to make this happen, if that's an ideology, well, that's a pretty nice ideology.
And so we have several affiliated Facebook pages, and so the primary page that Steve is describing is Transcendental Politics. The Transcendental Politics into the search bar on Facebook. That's the main one that Steve is describing. And then we've got a set of other pages, and the other one, and Steve mentioned this early in his talk at the very beginning. Why is Uncertainty is the name of another Facebook page that we have. And within Why is Uncertainty, really anything goes. And we encourage people to discuss topical issues, political figures, but with humility and using the tools and using the mindset that we're discussing. So
And it's been pretty amazingly successful.
Yeah.
In terms of there have not been flame wars on Why is Uncertainty. People have expressed a range of ideas, and it's been informative for us.
And there's some other affiliated Facebook groups that we've set up for debating and for putting up the elf farm. So we've been the elf farm the elf farm. So that these are memes that are positive, that are in the spirit of transcendental politics, so promote kindness and goodwill.
So I think meta messaging was one of my original. So in politics, messaging is a part of it. You're messaging your position. Meta messaging is your messaging the underlying idea of all of those positions. So the idea that we want to create a kinder, more humane, more self-realizing world, a world where our lives are richer and better and fairer as a result.
So I think Amy, you want to say something?
Well, I was gonna ask about, as a group, I'm trying to understand more about the group part of it and how you do try to culturally sway people to drop their tribalism. Even coming to this, I'm just thinking once, as you get this message out, there's people who are just scrambling to give it a label. You are a liberal, I can't talk to you because.
Intellectual is definitely
So what is the way that the ideal way that you have to do that?
Well, right now, our primary forum is social media, so we're operating through social media at this point. We do have a bunch of programs, and I put some stuff over there. No one will ever see it all together, but ideas that we have. So one idea, for instance, is the information smart grid. So there's a bunch of pieces to it. It's not. I don't see it as suddenly overcoming that obstacle in one fell swoop. It's putting into place little pieces here and there that grow and then erode that over time. The information smart grid, so one of the problems we have right now with social media, this wonderful, potentially wonderful decentralized medium of mass communications where we can have a collective consciousness that enriches one another, edifies one another. Look at how that went wrong. Well, one of the things that went wrong, is that the social media companies have newsfeed algorithms which reinforce biases, confirmation bias. So if you like something, you get more of that. It doesn't matter how crazy it is or how credible, you just get lots of information reinforcing what you already believe is true. So the information smart grid is an idea, and it can take two forms. One is a subscription service at the building, and one is to lobby Congress and social media companies to actually impose this, is a modified algorithm, which ensures that people who show an interest in an issue get information that challenges their biases as well. Not exclusively, but incredible, and there's a certain amount of vetting of credibility in information, some degree of that. You have to be careful about that. That's a complex issue. How do you vet it? How do you not introduce another bias in the vetting process? But that's something that can be grappled with. And so the information smart grid is the idea of promoting and doing that. That's just one tangible idea.
I have a question about people on the other side, but more right wing, whatever. I guess you would probably classify the little people as more open, and so these are people that are closed, and you work with those kinds of people, and where do you see movement towards some kind of more openness?
Well, we have courted some people. There's John Brackney, who's a kind of well-known libertarian political figure, whose name stick right now is he wants to get some this guy, and he wants people to be nice to each other. And so was an opportunity for a dialogue where say, well, this is about people being nice to each other. That's what we're about. There's Rob Whitmer, with whom I had a robust online friendship for some time. He doesn't want to get involved in anything right now, he's focusing on general. You guys know Rob Whitmer, the moderate Republican Colorado state senator. Good guy. Moderate Republican from back in the day, but basically a good guy. You know? And I'd say John Brackney is basically a good guy. So these are the kinds of people we're looking for getting involved. None of them jumped in and said, oh, yeah, we're all getting involved. And I just want to kind of correct you at the risk of alienating people in the room. I don't see only the right wing as the opposition to this. I see the tribalistic left as well as being in opposition to this. So tribalism is the intense ideological tribalism is the opposition. It's not just right-wing tribalism. Even though I would tend to agree that the substance of right-wing tribalism is more toxic, especially now, than the substance of left-wing tribalism. That tribalism itself has its own toxicity. The modality, the cognitive and emotional modality has its own toxicity. Different, separate from the substance. So I would not agree that we're strictly liberal, and then it's only right wing that would be on the opposite side.
Steve, I want to leave here tonight thinking, at least to myself, that I clearly understand your philosophy.
Oh, that's never. No,
And it's not your fault.
So I have been sitting here trying to think of the toughest situation or question that I could pose to you. We're all, to some degree, political activists. Most of us are very interested in the climate. You're running again for the state, this is hypothetical. You're running again for the Colorado State Assembly. You're a Democrat, you're a person who wants the climate to support human life going forward. You're invited to a political discussion, debate, presentation with all the other candidates, Republican, Democrat, whatever they are. And it takes place in Greeley, Weld County. You want to tell these people, hey, we've got to do something about the climate. You look around and you realize, oh, these guys showed up in the boots and dungarees. They just came off the drill head. They earned their living now. How are you going to transcend and wait?
So there's a bunch of dimensions to that, and we really don't have time to go into all the dimensions of it. One dimension is we don't ever expect transcendental politics to prevail everywhere and every when. We're not thinking that we could walk in there into any situation with transcendental politics and people are going to swoon over the brilliance and wonder and beauty of it. We know that there are enclaves of situation and context where it won't make a dent. Okay? The civil rights movement faced the same problem. The American Revolution faced the same problem.
The library will be closing in 20 minutes.
Every attempt to affect world history, affect the world, affect humanity, faces the same problem. If the litmus test for the value of a movement is, can you prevail in every situation, with all audiences at all times, no movement would ever get off the ground because all would be dead on arrival. So this is, again, the long-term thing. My idea is attract the willing first. I don't even really want to engage with the unwilling at this point. I don't really care to engage with the intransigently opposed right now. I want to say, I want to find the people who are kind of like, well, that would be a kind of good idea. I want to find them first. And I want to create a movement of the willing first. And let that movement of the willing create a gravitational field of mass. And let that mass grow as a result. Now, the question of how would a person thinking in this way, and I just think a rational person trying to do what's effective and beneficial, how would they do that? I would have to sit down and plan that out. I can't do it on the spot. But you think about your audience. You think about what matters to them. You think about, yeah, well, you think about, I'm not even going to say. You think about all the things that matter to them, their children, their lives, their world, their everything, their religion, whatever it is, you think about all the things, you really dig deep into that. You get into their cognitive landscape and their language, and you interact with that, you articulate that. That would be the way to do it. Now, the details of that, how you construct it and how you compose that symphony of interaction with that audience, that's more than I'm going to do extemporaneously right here. But you do the best you can do in that situation. Transcendental politics is not a panacea, and I write that. Everything I write that. It's not a panacea. There are no panaceas. There is no magic wand that cures the world of all ill. There is no magic wand that makes us rational and all rational and humane people. What there is things we can do which can ripple into the fabric of our shared cognitive landscape in beneficial ways. What can we do individually, collectively as an organized group, to affect our shared cognitive landscape in beneficial ways? Locally, nationally, globally, whatever ways we can. And then do that. Figure out.
I think I understand and I support your philosophy.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
Should I pass these around for you?
So the baskets.
I'm gonna just pass these.
Well, either way, those tell you what's in the baskets. The great things about these pocket parables, by the way, is they're very hard to open. If you have arthritis, find someone